I'd like to open the meeting to the sharing of testimonies of healing through Christian Science. Jeremy.
I am very grateful for this church and all that has changed in my life since coming to Plainfield. For months, I had this feeling that I needed to make a schedule for myself. Primarily, this came about because I would spend all day sitting at my computer, and then by the time I got up, I'd be all hunched over. At first, that felt right. I figured that God didn't bring me here for any other reason but to do this work. But in the course of praying about this, the thought came that, yes, God did bring me here to do this work, but he didn't bring me here to be a martyr for the cause, and this isn't some sort of penance. I need to eat well, exercise, and show God that I am grateful for every part of my life. And when I had this thought, I realized that my practitioner had been telling me this for as long as I've been here. The final push came from the article, Your Own Thought, where Mrs. Eddy wrote, quote, "When you see error, you must destroy the seeming power for all, as well as for yourself. I heal you because I heal myself," unquote. When I read that, I saw how much I was off track in my thinking. To leave myself unhealed does no one any good. So I came up with a schedule and have been refining it for the past week and a half. I get up and I do my work, but I also take time to stretch and exercise and eat. And what a blessing that has been. My practitioner told me last week that quote, "the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord," unquote. And after the call, I had to look it up, and I found that was from Psalm 37:23. And the next part says, "And he delighteth in his way." I'm so grateful for the Christian Science taught at this church, for the patience, compassion, and vigilance of my practitioner, for this wonderful opportunity that God has given me to put off the old man and learn to become what he created me to be. There's so much God has given me to delight in. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for the readings on honesty tonight. I am deeply grateful for all I am learning here that is, quote, "bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience to Christ," end quote. That's 2 Corinthians 10. One place I am seeing the benefits of this is my trips to the grocery store. One of the most dreaded chores due to my expectation and then experience of rude individuals. I felt victim to others' whims and moods. Because of the work of a Plainfield practitioner, this attitude is diminishing greatly, and I am quick to catch if I drift. She reminds me often it is no easier to think good thoughts than bad ones. As my thoughts have become more positive, so have my experiences. Excuse me. Just the other day, I found myself in line with a person whose behavior was cranky and rude. Rather than react and let it take my peace, I chose to remind myself of the qualities of the individual of God's creating, such as joy, cooperative, respectful, and so forth. Minutes later, her demeanor became pleasant and relaxed, and she did something thoughtful for me. I was very grateful for this small proof of the science of Christ that is taught here, and for Mary Baker Eddy for sharing her discovery, and for Jesus, our way shower. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Gary.
I was thinking recently of an experience I had a few years ago, which I would like to share. I think I've mentioned it before, but there was a day when I was out working, doing a lot of outside work, and I had a problem with one of my arms. Every time I tried to lift it above my shoulder, I was unable to do so. And I would experience a tremendous excruciating pain. So after a few minutes of this, I'm grateful that I was able to call a Christian Science practitioner from this church and ask for help. And I will never forget the feeling I had of love, compassion, comfort, and absolute confidence that God was right there and would heal me. There was no doubt that God was right there in control. And it was a sharp change to my whole thought as I was listening to the practitioner speak to me. And I was told a couple things that were very helpful to me. One was a quote from Science and Health by Mary Baker Eddy, that matter can make no conditions for man. And another statement from Mrs. Eddy that health is not a condition of matter, but rather is a condition of mind with a capital M. In other words, God. And I was told that the mind, or God, that made the entire universe governs the entire universe. And that includes every action of my body. Well, by the time I was finished with that conversation with the practitioner, my thought was thousands of feet higher than it was before I called. I could feel God's presence. I could feel God's love as a result of that. And with the prayers of the practitioner, shortly thereafter that day, I was entirely healed. I could lift my arm without any pain and do everything that I needed to do. And that condition never did return. I'm so grateful for the help of that practitioner, for that Christly love that healed that condition. I'm so grateful to Mary Baker Eddy for giving us the science of Christianity, which heals all the time. It's so grateful to be here tonight.
Thank you. Chardell from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Trusting God completely is something that I thought I was doing, but since coming to Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, I realized that a lot of work is needed in this area concerning my relationship with God. Almost 2 weeks ago, while traveling on a highway, the car stopped shifting gears correctly. 2 years ago, I would have been alarmed and would have pulled into the nearest rest stop. While praying, I knew that God's plans were always in operation, and I trusted that a thought would come and I would know what to do. The hazard lights were put on and all went well. The car is running perfectly now after receiving some adjustments. I give thanks to God, Christ Jesus, Mary Baker Eddy, our practitioners, and all of Plainfield Church for being lifted up to a more spiritual life. And also, thank you for the beautiful readings tonight and this service. Thank you.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I want to thank the readers tonight. The place that I work for, every once in a while they will send us out of state or very far place that have to do with a few driving. And when we go there, we have to go in group, which means you have to work with some people. And it seems like every week I have to work with different kind of people. Every week I have to work with different kind of people. But some some of my coworkers' behaviors sometimes could make, even though the work already is very, very demanding and could be very difficult sometimes, but sometimes the people that you work with can even make it even more difficult to deal with. And it seems like there's nothing I can do about it, and it's not within my control to choose who I want to work with. But there is something I can do about it. I can pray about it. I know that very well. And I've been praying for it and about it, that if this people doesn't change, maybe God can help me with different people. I mean, the company has a lot of people to choose from. And I've been praying for that. If somebody refuses to change, there's always a way to do that. If something is not good, it has to be removed. And God answered that prayer that I've been praying for. In the last 3 weeks, it's been the best time I have worked for them, because the people that I have started working with are people that I've never worked with before. And it was a big change, and everybody started working together, and they were very helpful to me. And I knew that it was God who answered that prayer for me. Because I've learned in this church that anything that is not good, anything that is not truth, doesn't come from God, and it has to be removed. And that I know is my control to do so, and I did. I'm so grateful for all that I'm learning here on how to use truth in everything that we do in life, not just in church, but outside. Thank you.
Thank you. Luann from New York, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm grateful for Christian Science and all that I'm learning about the importance of being obedient to God. This year, because of what I've learned and gained from the prayerful support and guidance of my practitioner, I am fully prepared for the winter months ahead. I learned that all things are in God's time, and that lack of obedience is self-will. So when the thought came to check the generator and make sure that it runs properly, I didn't question it or reason that it was only July, and I still had plenty of time. One thing after another came up, like insulating the pipes. And because I didn't put it off, the money was at hand to cover the cost of having it professionally spray foamed, which is far better than what I would have been able to do. For many years I struggled throughout the winter months unprepared. Things seemed to pile up and come at me all at once. Because I was not listening to those thoughts that came, I always felt like I was in emergency mode, crawling around under the house in the cold, unthawing pipes, praying to God in desperation, and thinking that life was so difficult. I'm filled with gratitude for His loving provisions and for all the lessons I have learned since coming to the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent and receiving so much love and guidance, which has so tremendously enriched my life. I know whatever battle lies ahead, I can always depend on God to get me through it. Thank you.
Thank you. Fairley from Maryland, go ahead.
Thank you. Being at Plainfield, I am very grateful for the constant and wonderful practitioner support I have there from the time I came, and all the teaching every weekend, which has gradually led me to somewhat greater ability to practice Christian Science with some measure of success. And with the change of season, I'm always reminded that when I came in the first fall that I was at Plainfield, I got an extensive cold. And my practitioner told me about an article, which I didn't know about, to work with in Mrs. Eddy's miscellaneous writings. I've got cold. In that article, Mrs. Eddy points out, when the child Mrs. Eddy speaks about says to the doctor, I've got cold. Mrs. Eddy points out, what if that sweet child, so bravely confessing that she has something that she ought not to have, and which Mama thought must be gotten rid of, had been taught the value of saying even more bravely and believing it, I have not got cold. Well, I still kept up a rather extensive cold that fall. It persisted. And the same thing happened the next year. But my third year, I was more clear and persistent in declaring I do not have cold. And it never developed, and this is my third year since then with no such symptom whatsoever. I'm very grateful to everything that I have learned at Plainfield. I'm grateful to God, I'm grateful to Jesus, to Mrs. Eddy for giving us this science, and I'm grateful to my practitioners and to all. And thank you so much for the very, very, very good and incisive readings tonight.
Thank you. Jim from Arizona, go ahead.
Good evening. Today I was working on page 2 of the December newsletter. Usually I find articles fall into place very quickly. When working on past newsletters, I always had additional ideas arriving to help me to fill up the newsletters. It is a joy, always a joy, to work on the newsletter. Thank you.
And thank you for your fine efforts and that wonderful publication that you put so much of your heart and soul into. Thank you. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Today is November 2nd, as you all know, and on today's daily calendar statement from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, it says, and I quote, "You get truth from God and must share it." That was written by my practitioner. It's only a suggestion, but for me, that means I better do it. When I came here last summer, I was going through a rough patch. Divorce. I married for love. She was the love of my life, and marriage I always thought was forever. When I heard the news, I hit the rough patch. There's our twins, friends, in-laws, a house with a mortgage, cars, 2 rescue dogs, and a parakeet named Dexter. I felt myself sliding down a slippery slope with no one to turn to, only myself to blame. Am I a bad person, I wondered? I felt my life was over, but then somewhere I heard, don't give up 10 minutes before the miracle. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other coming here to Sunday services. The good news is I'm not a bad person, but now am I the Son of God? How much gratitude I feel for this church. Since learning the truth of my true identity, and that's the truth I got from God, and know in sharing it that it may help someone else out there going through a rough patch. The good news is it gets better, and how thankful I am that I did not give up 10 minutes before the miracle of growing in grace expressed in meekness, love, patience, and so much more. Thanks again to my practitioner for this healing and all the good folks at Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent.
Thank you. This is Bruce. I've been learning more and more as we go along to be grateful even when my prayers are not answered. And for me, that's been quite a point of growth, because I can't tell you how many years I went through where I prayed, didn't get what I wanted, and then skidded into a real downslide. And that's not such a good thing to do, because after all, God does have his plan, and if I don't get what I want, what I really need to do is to hook up with God's plan and drop what I want. And something like that happened recently, and with a very wonderful result. I was actually had the opportunity to do some electronic fix a problem that involved electronics. And I got to tell you, I got no training or whatever in this, and I quite frankly didn't know what I was doing, but thank God he knows. And I went through several steps, prayed all the way, got a few answers, thanking God for the ones that came, but never really got the thing to come to a completion. But I just decided, God, you are in control. I didn't decide it. I'm clearing my thinking. God, you're in control, and I know that you have an answer, and that you'll show me in your good time. And in the meantime, I'm just going to be watching and listening to see what it was. And after quite a long time had gone by, there was a professional who I happened to have a chance to talk to, and he went up and looked at this project, and even though he didn't have to, and he explained the whole thing to me and gave me the answers that I needed. And I was so thankful for the kindness of this man, and I thanked him, but I was also thankful for God for teaching me the lesson to patiently wait for his answer, instead of feeling like it has to resolve in a certain way or in a certain time according to my deciding. No. But when it was all done, the project was completed and everything was done well. But it had to be done in God's way, so I'm thanking God. Keep me listening to you, please, because that's a very safe place to be, I've found. And he does answer righteous prayer. Not selfish prayer, righteous prayer. He does answer it. And just find myself very humbled before him and thanking him. Mike from New York, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the wonderful readings and the beautiful service. I run because of God, and am very thankful and grateful for that. Back in around 1975, when I got out of school, I injured my knee quite severely. Over the years, I had 3 knee operations and was given some pretty dire predictions by the doctors. But I didn't want to believe them, had no alternatives. But then my wife, who's a veterinarian, introduced me to alternative medicine, and that gave me a lot of hope. What she told me gave me a lot of hope, which the doctors never, ever gave me. So I was very grateful for that, and just bounced along as best I could. Things started to get better, but then coming into Christian Science, my knee has gotten better and better over the years, and I don't really even specifically pray about it unless I tweak it or something. But just from the study and the understanding of God more and more, improved to the point where about 3 years ago I could start running again for the first time in many, many years. And the thing that I really enjoy about running is that I don't get to do it that often, but when I do, it always makes me really think that I have to be grateful to God, and that I'm running for God and with God and to glorify God. And I am just so grateful for the teachings of Christian Science, the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent with all its wonderful resources. I don't find enough time to partake in all of it, but whenever I do it, it's always so uplifting, and I am so grateful to be here.
Thank you. Karen from Kansas, go ahead.
On Monday, Halloween night, I got ready to receive Halloweeners at my door, and they came from 6 to 9 p.m. I was up constantly and handed out candy and admired their costumes. I had a good time and never used my walker. I didn't need it. It reminded me of Mrs. Eddy telling us in Science and Health of an actor who was so lame he could hardly walk, but when his cue came, he was ready and as active as any of the younger members. Mortal mind tells us of infirmities which are not real in science. I was glad for the many proofs I had of this. Thank you for the Christian Science practitioner, for the wonderful testimonies, and for the music, and for the readings. And thank you for the Plainfield Church.
Thank you. Suzanne from Vermont. Go ahead.
Good evening. I wanted to share something that happened this morning. I was awakened at 7:30 with a phone call from a truck driver saying that he had my delivery of a very heavy item, and could my street take an 18-wheeler? And I said, well, I think so, but we have a dirt road, and he didn't think his equipment could unload the very heavy item. So as we went back and forth, it just seemed more and more impossible that this much expected delivery was going to be made. And we traded phone calls, and it just seemed like one of those situations where there just didn't seem to be any way that this thing could be delivered. And, you know, the temptation was to be irritated, spiraling downward, just, I've been anticipating this, and, you know, this guy is supposed to deliver it, and he's not doing it. It's an older fellow, and he just couldn't help me. He said, well, don't you know somebody with a truck? And so we traded some phone calls, and his coworker asked me to rent a husband for a day, and because my husband's out of town, and the whole thing just seemed to be going nowhere. And so at one point I told him, let me call you back. And I said, you know, there's one mind, and that one mind, as we're taught here, is always governing every situation and governing it harmoniously. And this doesn't have to turn into some kind of a silly nightmare. So I called my husband, and he came up with a great idea to call a neighbor. The neighbor owns a business, and he said, he has a truck. He can bring it up to you. So I called the neighbor. His business is located directly across from the trucking company. I had no idea. And he offered to receive the item. And, I mean, long story short, I called the fellow back. I said, I've got a great solution for you. You need to go across the street, and they'll take it. And within 10 minutes, this item, which seemed half an hour earlier never to be able to get to my house, was in my garage. Done. Finished. It was the most harmonious working out. And I'm convinced, because I have been taught here to invite mind to the table, to know that mind is governing every situation, and also to know that God governs every aspect of our lives, no matter how small. So I just wanted to share that. I'm very grateful to have heard these readings tonight about honesty of spiritual power. That is a lesson, again, that the teachings of this church have instilled within me, and it has helped me infinitely. It has improved how I live, because I have taken these teachings and run with them. I'm grateful for this meeting tonight. There's no other place I'd rather be. Thank you.
Thank you. Dede or Florence, go ahead.
This is Florence. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the beautifully read, instructive readings. Many years ago, I felt I was not gaining much from my readings. I found out that to keep reading, and thinking that the excessive reading necessarily made me a practicing Christian Scientist was a mistake. One day, the thought came for me to look up the word reflection. And I found that I have not really understood that word, how it applies to who I am as God's child. Finding out more about it, I found that thinking I was some person reflecting God's qualities was not the correct understanding of reflection. That understanding meant I was a self apart from God. In any reflection, there are not two, but just one. The understanding that there is only one infinite being whose reflection includes me and everyone else made me more able to embrace my identity as being spiritual and including all the good that God is. This meant that if I have any challenge coming up, I must know it's a lie, not included in reflection. It has helped me to see error's powerlessness and nothingness because no error is included in reflection. I thank God and Christian Science for this understanding. And now I have a testimony from a gentleman who has been honest, very patient, and persistent with his desire to understand God. He writes from Illinois. Last week, I was told my last day of work at my job was sooner than I expected. I wanted to call my practitioner, but something made me hold on. On the very last day, the thought came which made me question how I am going to contribute to the bills at home. From what I have been learning about God, that wrong thought was quickly replaced with the truth to trust God. Shortly afterwards, my phone rang, and it was a lady offering me a job that I had applied for 3 weeks earlier, and a job I really wanted. God is good. Christian Science has taught me how God's blessings are always waiting for us if we lean on Him. Thank God and my practitioner for all I'm learning through Christian Science. Thank you for the service, the hymns, the testimonies. I'm grateful to be here tonight.
Thank you. Mary.
I'll read from our church website bulletin board, the first from Costa Rica. Thank you for the wonderful round table. The service was great, the singing was fun, and I loved it. And then from New Jersey, thank you. We loved being together with you. It was a holy and joyous time. And then Wisconsin. I just wanted to express my gratitude for being allowed to proof the upcoming lessons. Today my prayers were answered while proofing an upcoming lesson sermon. Thank you to whoever wrote it. And then the next are from Pennsylvania. I'm grateful for the testimony entitled Expect God to Heal. This testimony can be found on the Plainfield website under Audio Library. It is a gem. And then we've started listening to Dominion Within with Reverend Kratzer, read by Bruce Singletary. Thank you, Plainfield, for providing this useful resource on audio, and Bruce for reading it with understanding. And then another Pennsylvania. Last night I felt led to look up what Mrs. Eddy has to say about the man of integrity. I found it in Miscellaneous Writings on page 147. It reads in part, "The upright man is guided by a fixed principle, which destines him to do nothing but what is honorable and to abhor whatever is base or unworthy. He would much rather fail of success than attain it by reproachable means. It seems like another great standpoint for praying about our public servants and those aspiring to any office. Integrity as a spiritual quality, having its source in God, is native to man. It's interesting, that's what we read tonight, and those were such beautiful readings. The idea, the importance of honesty, it is spiritual power, and dishonesty is human weakness which forfeits divine help. It's Mary Baker Eddy. That's a big price to pay for dishonesty. I've heard more than once recently people, and also people abroad, sort of despairing about what's going on in America with our politics. But what was read tonight talks about chemicalization. It talks about, it was read, how important this is. It is important to bring error out from under cover so it can be seen and healed and purified. It's cleansing. Mrs. Eddy says we have to stir up the muddy riverbed. It's not always a very pleasant process, but it is so much better than declaring peace, peace, when there is no peace. So we know that divine justice is in full and complete operation, and anyone who is dishonest or immoral or anything else will be brought to that justice, and that it cannot stand. It only comes out to be healed and to be uncovered, and we can rejoice in this time, and we can stand steadfastly, and we can hold the thought of the man of integrity as the ideal for ourselves and for everyone. Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health, during this final conflict, wicked minds will endeavor to find means by which to accomplish more evil, but those who discern Christian Science will hold crime in check. They will aid in the ejection of error. They will maintain law and order and cheerfully await the certainty of ultimate perfection. I am so grateful to Mrs. Eddy for what she has given us, for this wonderful truth that we can apply to every circumstance, as we heard tonight, small and very big, and we will all be praying together for the good of all mankind.